G'day guys, Lachlan Wilmot here from Athletes Authority. Today I wanted to sit down and have a little bit of a chat around off-season because it is a massive thing for athletes at the moment. We also see it along social media, a lot of people posting what to do, what not to do when it comes to off-season. But I wanted to take you guys through a little bit of just a planning day, a bit of a structure that we will typically sit down with athletes here at Athletes Authority when it comes up to the off-season to make sure that they have a really well planned out off-season, one that both encompasses some rest and relaxation to mentally recover, but also one that means that they can actually make progress physically where we can. Obviously, my background specifically is in professional sport. Often these off seasons can be anywhere between 6 to 10 weeks, most commonly 8. So what we're going to base it off is a bit of amateur / professional, which means we'll probably be sitting around that 8 to 10 weeks of off season. And now off season typically is going to be defined as the last game that you've played, whether that be the end of season, whether that be the end of finals, all the way through to when you actually start back on field or on court for the start of your official preseason. Again, some people have longer than others, but an off-season period is quite different to a pre-season period. Now, pre-season period is obviously that definition of being back on field, back on court training, but you don't actually have any games. You've got the opportunity to build capacity and build load over a long period of time leading into an in-season period. But the off-season period can be a little bit different, a little bit more unique. Some people can go too long without doing anything and others can do too much. And some of the two key aspects that we see done poorly in the off-season is when the season ends, that an athlete will almost feel like, oh, I can't take a break. I need to be able to do something. I need to be able to keep training. I need to keep myself going. And what they do is they don't really give themselves enough time to relax, recover, rejuvenate, get rid of some of those little niggles in the body. And they start training a little bit too early. And often they find themselves complaining of issues 3 weeks into off season. And off season is not the time you should be complaining of issues. Off season should be the time that you are feeling fresher and more energized because these issues have settled. The other part and the caveat to that we also see is people taking too much time off. They get way too comfortable. They maybe go to Bali for a couple of weeks. They reset, they come back. They're out of routine. They're trying to find that routine again of training. They don't really have a goal to train for. They don't have any blocked phases that they know that they need to commit to. And it certainly can end up 6, 7 weeks go past. And all they've done is they've gone for a little jog here and there and maybe done 1 or 2 weight sessions. Now, as you can imagine, in preparation for a pre-season, that is a shocking place to be and a really tough place to be. So we want to try and make sure that we break up our off-season into some key components, small edible bites that we can actually break down and target and have some goals for each of those sections. So first and foremost, you can see here, we've got sort of an 8 to 10 week average that we're going to work from. I like to break it up into a 2-week R&R and then 2 4-week blocks in a very simple outcome for most of the average athletes. When we look at the 2 weeks, mostly what I tell my athletes whenever we finish is I try and stay out of their hair. I don't ask them to do anything. I don't commit to anything. Usually when we finish our last game, go out, have a few drinks, do what you need to do. You've got 2 weeks until athletes start to come back to you and go, oh, I feel like I should be doing something. I feel like I need to do something with my body. As soon as an athlete comes to me and tells me they feel like they should be doing something, it says to me that mentally they've kind of recovered. They've sort of gotten over the loss, and unless you've won the grand final, everyone loses typically their last game. And then we go into the grand final winners that obviously have been celebrating for a few weeks, obviously need to shake off a few too many drinks. But ultimately, that 2-week period is kind of that magical time where people can recover, reset, get over the loss. And then in that 3rd week, they're pretty ready to start doing something. That doesn't mean we go full flog straight away. It doesn't mean we suddenly put them into this high performance program day in, day out. It does take a little bit of time to get yourself moving again and get that motivation back. So I really try and emphasize that regardless of how good or how bad you feel, first 2 weeks, consciously do nothing. If you want to go for a walk, if you want to go for a light jog, as you can see here, there's no real prescription. But ultimately, if you feel like you want to go for a swim and general things, of course, whatever gives you the best release, go for it. But we endeavor to try and make sure that first 2 weeks is really nothing. Take your time, reset, find that motivation and drive again to get back to training. Because if you don't get that back, it's going to be a very hard slog for the rest of the off season. And ultimately, you turn the whole off season into this half break where you don't really recover, but you also don't really make progress. So then we start to look at what's coming next. And ultimately, you can see here we go into our second block, which I usually have about 4 weeks of. So I try and nail a 4-week block, which for me is about mental recovery. So we get back to some training, but ultimately I'm not taking it too seriously. I'm not chasing high-speed movements. I'm not typically chasing a lot of individual needs that someone has, because what I'm hoping to do is those first 2 weeks and at least the first half of this, it's about getting regenerative and getting relaxed again and getting your body back. If you've ever gone a back-to-back season or you've ever gone games where you feel like your body's just breaking down slowly over an in-season period, it's amazing what simply doing nothing for a few weeks and then doing very general training can do for your body. Often you may not need to go and get physio treatment straight away. Certainly something you need to consider and get checked out if you have an actual injury. But general body awareness is something that we want to make sure that we get ourselves out of in those first few weeks. And having those 2 weeks of just nothingness does an amazing amount for your body. And the second part to that is getting yourself moving with very general work for 4 weeks. And typically I like to lay it out with 2 total body lifts a week and then 2 on-leg movements a week. Now those on-leg sessions typically look like a general run and then something that you may term a little bit more sport specific. And what I mean by that is if we go 1 30-minute jog, general jog, it can be done on field, it can be a road run, whatever suits the individual. But then that second run, if for example in AFL, we might do some higher repeat work. It might be 200s, 400s, something like that, a bit more aerobic power done on a field. If it's for a netball or a basketball, or it might be more orientated around some shuttle work and some change of direction work on a hard surface on a court. I don't want to suddenly dial up all these sessions on hard surface or lots of change of direction, but I certainly want to make sure during this period that we are having some sort of stimulus, some sort of loading that allows the athlete to have an exposure to what they're going to have in their sport. Because we've given them 2 weeks off, a real good R&R, you're not going to suddenly lose huge amounts of speed, huge amounts of fitness. If anything, you're going to have a super compensation response, and you're probably in this first week of the 4-week block going to be feeling better than you ever have over the past 12 months, and you're going to be ready to really attack the ground. And the important thing is we don't attack the ground too much. We don't suddenly load up 6 sessions in the first week, make yourself sore again, and we start to go down that rabbit hole. Really important to focus this 4 weeks on getting a mental recovery type attitude where you don't need to overcommit to anything too serious. We want to make sure that we've got a bit of mental recovery attitude. While we're hitting only 2 total body lifts, will be plenty of exposure to start to dial up some really good responses in the gym. And then on leg, again, like I said, a general run which starts to tick the legs over and get some good loading, but then also something a little bit more specific that may expose the individual to the energy system that's more dominant in their sport, or some more change of direction work if they're in a sport, say basketball or netball, that requires a little bit more shuttle running. You may choose to add a little bit of off-leg work as well. So there's little things that we can start to dial in here. If I'm working with a professional athlete that has been just absolutely serious, really dialed in for the past sort of 9 months in their training, I am certainly not opposed to this 4-week block that them doing spin classes, them going with their partner to do an F45 or a BFT, something different that they haven't done before. Obviously, I am very wary of people that have a history of injury and then potentially going to do something as intense as, say, CrossFit. Everyone is individual. You need to take each case as it comes. But ultimately, I'm not too fussed about having this high-performing, very specific program in this 4-week block. I, in fact, encourage people to try and expose themselves to something a little bit different. It could be something like a combine air session where they go to altitude and they do a mixed metabolic work. It could be, as I said, training with a partner, with family, with friends, doing something they do. As long as we're getting 2 exposures of some resistance training and then 2 on-leg exposures, I'm happy to dabble in with other things as well. And it doesn't matter how general in nature. Other options are also things like Pilates. I've done a lot of work with athletes that love doing some Pilates options. We also want to see how we can delve into getting some speed work done as well, which for me is a big part of some off-season. I'm not really hung up on getting too much speed work done in the first 2 weeks of this 4-week block. But if you are going to start working with a speed coach or someone specific for speed, you can certainly start in this 4-week block. But those first 2 weeks will be very general and drilling-based orientation options. We're not opening up hitting max velocities just yet. We're just starting to get accustomed to new movements, new strategies, and we can build into it because it'll give you a good 6-week block here where you can start to hammer down and really focus on some key aspects of high-speed work. So hopefully that 4-week block makes a bit of sense and you can kind of see the attitude and the arrangement we want to go with. The second 4-week block is where we start to become a little bit more specific. This is where I tell my athletes, now we don't want to see you at F45. We don't want to see you doing general spin classes all the time. This is where I'm going to start to nail probably 3 total body lifts with a little bit more orientation to that athlete's needs and the needs of the sport that they're about to return to for pre-season in this week here. So it's really important to start to get a little bit more specific, but understanding this is still a very large general physical preparation phase. We don't need to be getting too fancy, but we do need to be accountable to the athlete's needs at this stage. I'm still looking at 2 on leg, but I'll start to nail 2 real key aspects of it where both sessions on leg will be a lot more specific in nature. They're going to be a little bit more targeted around the energy system requirement they need, and we'll also look at maybe any change of direction or shuttle type orientated runs that they need to do. I can then look at, okay, well, maybe I can layer in a 3rd on-leg session. Maybe it's an individual that is doing a little bit more speed work, where we might have 2 speed-orientated sessions, and then my 3rd session will be a little bit more general in nature. So when it comes to trying to target something in the off-season that you want to work on, and 8 times out of 10, it will be speed, it is a great opportunity, this 6-week block here, to target some good speed. We can do 8 weeks worth of speed training, but you're going to have 2 weeks of very general motor control drilling type work to build into it, and then 6 weeks of really good exposure to high speed efforts. And that is on top of being very well coached into the movements and the positions that you want to get out of it as well. But this is really a focus of intent. We want these training sessions to start to bring back a sense of intent, a sense of desire, and a real focus on the fact that we're preparing for pre-season. Here, we're doing nothing. Here, we're just focusing on getting our body moving and feeling good again. Here is when we're actually preparing for pre-season. So when we come back into the fold for pre-season training, our body has healed most of the niggles we needed to. We're feeling good, we're feeling fresh, we're feeling switched on. And if we're lucky, we've found a little bit of extra max strength and potentially a little bit more speed as well, if that's what you're focusing on for that 4 to 6 week block. When it comes to off-leg work, we can add that in as needed. If my athletes are tolerating the loading structure pretty well, I can dial in a lot more off-leg work. That there, I can be a little bit more accepting of it being quite general. Again, if they want to jump into just a spin class that they've been enjoying, absolutely no issues with that. Things like Pilates, we can continue here. These supplementary type options can work really well in the off-season to build a really good foundation going into pre-season. But the key aspect for when we return in pre-season, and the biggest thing that I tell a lot of athletes, is do not do a pre-season before a pre-season. Pre-seasons are hard. They're very, very tough to get through. If you have cooked yourself in this time here, you are not setting yourself up very well for a pre-season stint. Now, the intricacies of what we want to look at for pre-season, we can endeavour to go through at a different time. But for the off-season component, you need to really be focused on picking 1 to 2 key aspects you want to work on. Typically, speed, power, these type of things are great things that you can start to dial into in this off-season because you don't have the massive running loads in a lot of team sports that they'll have in pre-season. And that's when it's really hard to dial in on those things. So delve into things that you may not have the opportunity to do in a pre-season and in-season. Use this 4 to 6, this 8 to 6 week block to really target those aspects that you want to work on. And finding someone that can program well, coach you well, and map out a really strong pre-season And off season is really important for you. And for this, in this general stuff, hopefully this has given you a really good guide as to how you can lay out an off season, execute a good off season, and actually get a lot out of it instead of just going through the motions or finding yourself doing too much or too little. And finally, the biggest mistake I see with people in off season is just focusing on these things here and not getting a ball in hand or a ball on foot. If you are playing a sport that requires some sort of technical skill, which is pretty much everyone, you need to make sure we have some thread of that skill staying around in off season. Don't wait to day one of preseason, or even worse, day one of post-Christmas break to start getting a ball in hand. Make sure that you're doing skill work throughout the whole time. Focus on the key aspects that feel like let you down in season and start to target them in the off season. It doesn't need to be much, but when you're training, when you're doing some on-lead work, it might be down at the field, might be just running around the park, make sure we start to find some opportunity to get ball in hand, ball on foot, get the skills going, and make sure that you can execute skills when you're returning pre-season as well. Hopefully this has been a big help to you. Any questions, comments, make sure you touch base, but ideally take this away, utilize it for yourself, and hopefully you have the best off season you've had yet.